It's Bandit Guard 3's turn in initiative order. It's got a move -1, attack 0 with a range 2. So its movement is going to be 2, its attack is going to be 2, and it has a range 2. What space is it going to move to, and who is its target going to be? Hi, I'm Pete Krause with ModernCardboard, and in this video we focus on the monster's turn and monster automation in Gloomhaven. I'm not going to be able to cover every conceivable board configuration in this video, but I'll give examples that will build in complexity to provide you a solid foundation of how the monster's turn and monster's focus works. And then you'll be able to tackle the example we started with and most other board configurations you encounter. So let's get started. One of the things that I like about Gloomhaven is that all players take on the role of a character or characters rather than somebody having to act as the designated driver of the game and take on the role of the game master. That's because Gloomhaven has a set of automated rules the monsters take on their turns, and this removes decision making, or at least most of the decision making, from the players. When a monster activates in initiative order, all monsters of that type will activate. They follow the actions as written on their monster ability card from top to bottom. These are the only actions the monster of that type will take this round. So if the monster's ability card says move and attack, all they're going to do this round is move first and then attack. If the monster's ability card says shield and retaliate, then the monsters of that type would not move or attack this round, but just apply shield and retaliate if or when they're attacked during the round. When a monster activates in initiative order, you're going to activate the elite monsters first, followed by the standard monsters. So if there's more than one elite monster, then you activate them from the lowest numbered elite to the highest numbered elite, then move on to the standard monsters with the white base, activate the lowest number first, and then they activate in ascending order. So for this example, let's say it's the Bandit Guard's turn to activate in initiative order. I have 2 elites and 2 standard monsters. The elites would activate first, starting with number 1 followed by number 2. Then I move to the standard Bandit Guards, starting with number 3 followed by number 6. Each monster type has a stat card. The stat card is divided into 2 halves. This half is for standard monsters, and this half is for elite monsters. The number in the upper left corner matches the scenario level, so make sure when you put this in the stat sleeve at the beginning of your game that it matches the current scenario level that you're playing. Monster stat sleeves come in 2 types. There's the 6-space monster stat sleeve, and then there's a 10-space monster stat sleeve. So some monsters have 10 monster standees included with Gloomhaven, and others have 6 monster standees included with Gloomhaven. If you have 10, grab the 10 count monster stat sleeve. That way there's a space for each monster of that type. So when you randomize those, if you have a monster number 10, there's a slot 10 that matches. When a monster activates, they take the ability starting with the top one and then they work their way down to the bottom. So in this case, the Bandit Guard would take a move action first and then an attack. The +0 over here is how this modifies the base stats as seen over here for the Bandit Guard. So if I activate a standard Bandit Guard, my first ability would be move. And since this adds a +0, I would just use the base stat of 3. So I would have 3 movement. Then I'd move on to attack. And this adds a +0 to my attack, so my attack would just be a 2. So when a monster with either the abilities move, attack, or both move and attack on its ability card activates, you first have to determine who the monster's focus is. And as you'll see, the monster's focus is really 2 things. Which enemy is the monster going to try to attack, and what space are they going to move to? So for this example, it's the Bandit Guard's turn in initiative order. It has a move +0, so it's going to use its base stat of 3, and then it has attack +0, and it's going to use its base stat of 2. This is a melee attack since it doesn't have any range specified on its monster stat card. So a monster's focus is the enemy it can use its current attack against using the least amount of movement to get in range and line of sight. So in this case, the standard Bandit Guard can perform a melee attack too. To perform a melee attack, you have to be adjacent to your enemy. So for Bandit Guard 3, it could perform its maximum attack by moving 1 space to attack the Spellweaver, or it would have to move 3 spaces to attack the Brute. So in this case, the Spellweaver is the target, and this is the space it's going to move to. You'll always move the monster the fewest number of spaces where it can get in range and line of sight. So the Bandit Guard performs a melee attack too against the Spellweaver. And attacks work a lot like they do for player characters. When a monster attacks, it draws 1 attack modifier card. In this case, the monster draws a null card, so that means the attack does no damage. Lucky for the Spellweaver. Next, we move on to Bandit Guard 6. Bandit Guard 6 has the same. It has a move 3, and it's going to perform a melee attack too. To find its focus, we have to find the position and the enemy it's going to attack. Since Bandit Guard 2 performs a melee attack, it's going to need to be adjacent to the Brute or the Spellweaver. We're going to count movement to see which of those it can attack using the least amount of movement to get in range and line of sight. So 1, 2, 3 to get to the Brute, or 1, 2, 3 to get to the Spellweaver. So in the case of a tie, there are 2 tiebreakers. The first tiebreaker we start with is proximity to the Bandit Guard. Whichever one is closest as the crow flies in spaces breaks the tie first. And in this case, they're equal distant as the crow flies in spaces. So the next tiebreaker is initiative, and I'll show the initiative order here, and whichever one is lowest in initiative order is the one that's going to be the monster's focus. So initiative order for this round is the Spellweaver, followed by the Bandit Guard, and then the Brute. So the Spellweaver is lowest in initiative. So Bandit Guard 6 moves 3 spaces to get adjacent to the Spellweaver. It had to move 3, so it can move 3. Next, it performs its attack. It has an attack 2, draws its attack modifier for a -1, so it inflicts 1 damage on the Spellweaver. For a different example on a Bandit Guard's turn, in this case it has a move +1 and an attack -1. So that'll be a move 4 and an attack 1, and as a reminder that's a melee attack 1. We have 1 Bandit Guard, so Bandit Guard 6 is going to activate. And then I've added some obstacles here to show a little different example of how you'll find monsters' focus. So the Bandit Guard's current attack is a melee attack, so it again will need to be adjacent to its enemy. We count spaces to see which enemy it can reach with the least amount of movement. So we go 1, 2, 3 to the Brute, or 1, 2, 3 to the Spellweaver. The Bandit Guard doesn't have flying or jump, so it can't jump over the tables. Since there's a tie in this case, 3 spaces of movement to be adjacent to either one of these player characters, we have to break the tie. The first tiebreaker, as I said before, is proximity. So in this case, the Spellweaver is the monster's focus because it's closest in proximity, or as the crow flies. There's only 1 space dividing the Bandit Guard and the Spellweaver, whereas we have 3 spaces that divide the Brute and the Bandit Guard. So the Bandit Guard moves adjacent, has its move 4 this turn, and the Bandit Guard inflicts an attack 1. Draws an attack modifier, which is a -2. So again, lucky for the Spellweaver, it inflicts no damage this turn. As we've seen, movement works similar for monsters as it does characters. So just like how our character can move through other allies but not through monsters or summoned monsters, monsters can move through other monsters but not through characters or summoned characters. So for this example, Bandit Guard number 3 is going to activate. It has a move 0 and an attack 0 this turn, so it's going to move 3 and has a melee attack 2. So to get adjacent to either of its enemies, it has to move 3 spaces to be adjacent to the Brute, or it can move 1, 2 spaces moving through this other Bandit Guard to be adjacent to the Spellweaver. So in this case, the Spellweaver is the target, and this space is where the Bandit Guard's going to move. So it moves 2 spaces, and then would attack the Spellweaver. When you're finding monster focus, always act as if the monster has infinite movement. So if there's a path to the monster, it will find it and try to take it. So Bandit Guard number 6 activates. It needs to find the least amount of movement to be adjacent to either the Brute or the Spellweaver. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to be adjacent to the Brute, or 1, 2, 3, 4 to be adjacent to the Spellweaver. So in this case, the Spellweaver is the target again. This is the space the Bandit Guard would move to. However, since the Bandit Guard only has a move 3, it still would move the move 3 and end its turn here. If the monster can't get any closer to its focus for the turn, it will neither move nor attack for the turn. So if we look at the board, I've added a couple Bandit Guards in this case. And so for this example, let's say the Elite Bandit Guard is activated, Standard Bandit Guard 3 has already activated, and now we move on to Standard Bandit Guard number 6's turn. To get to the Brute, we would have 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces of movement. To be adjacent to the Spellweaver, it would be 1, 2, 3 spaces of movement. So the Spellweaver is Bandit Guard 6's focus for the turn. However, Bandit Guard 6 has a move 2, and wouldn't be able to get any closer because it can't land in the same space with another enemy. It would have to have a move 3 to actually get closer to the Spellweaver. In this case, Bandit Guard 6 would not move or attack. So for this example, let's say Bandit Guard 3 has already activated, so we move on to Bandit Guard number 6. Bandit Guard 6 has a melee attack too, so it needs to find its focus, and its focus is pretty easily the Brute. So it really is just one space away where it would need to be to attack. However, since there's another monster in this space, it can't move, and it can't move closer. So in this case, since there's no path for Monster 6 to attack this turn, it skips its move and attack. For this turn, the Living Corpse just has a move +1 and no attack. So we see move +1 means they have a move 2 for the turn. If the monster doesn't have an attack on its ability card, then you find the monster's focus as if they were going to perform a melee attack. It has a move 2, and it won't be able to get in a spot where it could attack, although it doesn't have an attack this turn. It just has a move 2, so it moves along the path as if it were going to perform a melee attack, and ends its turn, and Living Corpse suffers 1 damage. There we go. For this example, let's look at Bandit Guard 6. It's his turn in initiative order, and he's got a move 3 and a melee attack 2. So he needs to get to this space, but which one of these targets is he going to attack with his melee attack? So we have to go to tiebreakers, and we know the first tiebreaker is whichever one of these is closest in space's proximity as the crow flies away from this monster. So this is 1, 2 spaces, the Spellweaver is 2 spaces as well. So we have to go to the second tiebreaker of initiative. So one of the things to remember with a character summon is they always come before the character in initiative order. They come right before they take their turn. So the summon character is lower in initiative, and this would be the monster's focus. It's going to move here or here. Player's choice. Can move here and then make its attack against the character's summon. Traps and hazardous terrain work similar to obstacles when determining monster focus. And just remember that traps, hazardous terrain, and obstacles doesn't really affect monsters with jump or flying. That works a lot like it does for the player characters for monsters. So the only time a monster without jump or flying will enter a space with a trap or hazardous terrain is if it's their only option to focus on a target. In that case, they would take the path moving through the smallest number of negative spaces possible to find focus, and suffer the consequences. The Brute is the only enemy character out there, so that's going to be the Bandit Guard's focus. It can get within striking distance here in 4 spaces. It wouldn't cross through the trap because there's an alternate path around that. The only time it would go through trap or hazardous terrain is if that is the only option to its focus for the turn. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it would perform its attack. And for this strange example, let's say the Bandit Guard is stuck behind the hazardous terrain and the traps. In this case, since there's no other path to get to the Brute, It would take the path moving through the smallest number of negative spaces possible and then suffer the consequences of those spaces. So in this case, it could move through this hazardous terrain, this space, and then attack the brute and suffer the consequences. Trap damage is the scenario level plus 2. So if this is scenario 1, traps do 3 damage. Hazardous terrain does half of trap damage, so 1.5 rounded down. This bandit guard would take 1 damage. So in this case, the bandit guard has a move -1, so they'll have a move 2, an attack +0, so an attack 2, and then range 2. And so now we have a ranged element. So when we consider monster focus for the turn, we're going to consider a range 2. And so it really will only need to move 1 space to attack the Spellweaver or 1 space to attack the brute. So we have a tie. And if you remember, the first tiebreaker is proximity. How many physical spaces away is each enemy character? And in this case, they're both 2 physical spaces away from Bandit Guard 6. The second tiebreaker is initiative. So just to give the Spellweaver a break, for this turn, we'll say the brute has lower initiative this turn. So the brute is going to be Bandit Guard 6's focus. It's up to the player characters to choose which of these 2 spaces Bandit Guard 6 moves to, since both of those will put this Bandit Guard 6 in range 2 of the brute. So let's say the players say, hey, move here. Bandit Guard 6 would then perform its range 2, attack 2 against the brute. For another ranged example, we look at the Bandit Archer. So it's currently in range of both of these targets. It's closer to the brute, so this is its focus for the turn. However, if you notice, the Bandit Archer is adjacent to the brute. And if you remember from the character ability video, when you are adjacent making a ranged attack to your enemy, you're at disadvantage, meaning that you have to draw 2 attack modifier cards and use whichever one is worse. Anytime a monster is in a disadvantage area, it would want to move where it's not in disadvantage. It wants to move where it can make its maximum attack. So in this case, the Bandit Archer would move 1 space away from the brute, so it can make its maximum attack against the brute. The players would choose which space the Bandit Archer moves to, and in this case, I'm going to move him back here. Alright, now that we know the basics of monster focus, let's look at some more complex attacks. And in this case, we add some living bones to the board. The interesting thing about living bones is they have a target too, meaning they attack 2 separate characters on their turn. For this turn, they're going to use a move +0, attack +0. So that means they can move 3 and have an attack 1. Living Bones number 4 takes its turn first. With a multi-target monster, whether they have a target ability like the Living Bones does or an area attack, the first thing you need to do still is find the monster's focus. And to do this, we do it the same way we did before. This monster doesn't have range, so it performs a melee attack. So it would be 1, 2 spaces of movement to attack the brute, or 1, 2, 3 spaces of movement to attack the Spellweaver. So if this was a standard melee attack against one character, this Living Bones would just move to this space and perform its attack against the brute. For a monster with a multi-target attack, it will move to a position on the board to hit its focus, meaning the brute in this case, and as many other enemies as possible. To hit as many targets as possible, it would just need to move here to attack its focus and the Spellweaver. So it's the player's choice which character gets attacked first from a multi-target monster. So on the Bandit Archer's turn this round, it has an attack -1, but a target 2. So for this round, the Bandit Archer can make an attack 1. Notice it doesn't have move on its ability card for this round. The Bandit Archer is in range of the brute, and it has a range 4, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's also in range of the Spellweaver. In this case, since there's only 2 player characters, it's going to attack both of these player characters. If the Spellweaver were here, since the Bandit Archer doesn't have movement, it wouldn't be able to hit the Spellweaver and could only attack the brute. For this example, let's say that this bandit archer has a move 3 this turn and also has an attack with a target 2. So the Tinkerer is the bandit archer's focus since it's closest. However, it's at disadvantage. Also, since it's a multi-target attack, it's going to want to attack the Spellweaver as well. So it needs to get in a spot where it's in range without disadvantage from both of these enemies. The bandit archer has a range 4. So the bandit archer could move here and be 1, 2, 3, 4, be able to hit the Spellweaver and the Tinkerer. I think you'd also have the choice it could move here as well. So the bandit archer would attack the Tinkerer and the Spellweaver. So for quiz number 1, let's just say this elite bandit guard just took its turn. So it's a standard bandit guard's turn in initiative order. It has a move +0, attack +0, so it's got a move 3 and an attack 2 this turn, and that's a melee attack. Where is it going to move, and who is it going to try to attack? So the first thing we look at is who is the focus for this monster? Is it the Spellweaver or the Brute? We figure which one of those enemy characters is the least amount of spaces to get within range and line of sight. Since this bandit guard has a melee attack this turn, it needs to be adjacent to the Spellweaver or adjacent to the Brute. And so that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces here, or 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces to be adjacent to the Brute. Since they're equal distant away in spaces of movement, to break the tie, you look at who's closer in proximity. So the Spellweaver is 1, 2, 3 spaces away from this bandit guard, and the Brute is 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces away. So the Spellweaver is this bandit guard's focus. So it's going to take its move 3, even though it's not going to be adjacent this turn, it still moves. 1, 2, 3. So if you said this space and no attack, you're correct. It's Bandit Guard 3's turn in initiative order. It's got a move -1, attack 0 with a range 2. So its movement is going to be 2, its attack is going to be 2, and it has a range 2. What space is it going to move to, and who is its target going to be? So the first thing we determine is who is the monster's focus. So with a range 2, this monster could move 1, 2 spaces and be in range of the Spellweaver, or move 1, 2 spaces and be in range of the Brute. Since they're equal distant away, we need a tiebreaker. And again, the tiebreaker is who's ever physically closer in proximity. So the Spellweaver is 1, 2, 3 spaces away, the Brute is 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces away. So the Spellweaver is the focus. So the Bandit Archer number 3 is going to move to this space and then take its ranged attack. It wouldn't enter the hazardous terrain because there's a path to get to the Spellweaver and a path to get to the Brute on this turn. If there was no path whatsoever to get to one of the targets, and this was the only option, then it would enter the hazardous terrain. So let's look at a couple other abilities that monsters have. We're going to look at heal, loot, and summon. So the heal ability is pretty simple. So in this case, the monster would just heal 2 damage, and it would apply to the monster taking its turn, since it says self. If this said range down here, then you would heal another monster within range only if it has fewer hit points than this monster. For a monster with the loot ability, a monster can only loot the coins or money that's in its range. It can't loot treasures. So let's just say Living Bones had the loot ability with a range 1. It would be able to loot this coin, but not the treasure. The coins are lost. When this monster dies, that coin doesn't get dropped on the map. If a monster has a summon ability, it will summon another random monster standee of that type in an adjacent space closest to an enemy. So in this case, if Living Bones number 6 had the summon ability, and I know Living Bones don't have the summon ability, but if it did, it would summon in an adjacent space, and it would populate that in a place closest to another enemy. So it could put it here or here. That's going to be the player's choice. Another thing with summoned monsters you have to remember is they don't drop coins when killed. If there was no adjacent spaces open or standees left of that type, then the summon doesn't happen. So as you become an expert on all things monsters, let's finish up by taking a look at some differences you will see on boss stat cards. So the first thing you do when setting up a boss is you're going to grab the deck that says boss on it. Boss stat cards use the letter C many times, and that's a multiplier for the number of characters in the scenario. So for hit points for the bandit commander here, you would multiply 10 by the number of characters. Within the boss deck, you're going to see cards that say Special 1, Special 2, etc. Whenever you draw a card that says Special, for the boss's action for that round, it's going to take, if it's Special 1, whatever it says next to 1 here. For Special 2, whatever it says next to 2. And then the last thing that you'll see on boss stat cards is the conditions that they're immune to. They're always negative conditions. So that's most of what's involved with a monster's turn. Monster automation is one of those things that I make mistakes on all the time, or I miss something or forget that monsters are ranged when I move them, thinking that they're melee attack. But you just do the best that you can and then continue to play. That's what it's all about. So if you missed any of the other Modern Cardboard Gloomhaven videos, there is a playlist link on the screen here. And so I really hope you enjoyed this one and hope to see you all in the next video.